it would be whatever
Somewhere in the
10,000 divided by 8% is, which is,
80.
It's not 80.
Welcome to the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show, where hosts Brian Leverage and Jeffrey Holst pour out old-fashioned real estate advice.
Episode 19.
Welcome to the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show. My name is Jeffrey Holst, and this is Brian Leverage.
Thank you, Jeffrey Holst.
You're welcome, Brian Leverage. By the way, if you ever run into Brian Leverage in an airport, you should definitely yell out B-Lev, because that's what people call him that like him. B-Lev.
On occasion, yeah.
I like to say Blev.
Oops, we
Our
dropped that prop.
whiteboard fell down. Hold on a second. This is a very important prop because we've written nothing on it for this show.
Yes.
But we did use it in our last episode. Well, the one before that, actually. This is our third episode that we filmed in a row today, and I don't believe we'll be using the whiteboard. Although I did tell Brian in advance that if I decided to use the whiteboard, he would have to keep talking while I wrote on it.
But you see, Jeff just did both at the same time.
Got my pen.
Negating the need for me to continue talking.
I wasn't writing on it at the time. I was just holding it. So anyway, we're going to talk about something very exciting today, and we alluded to it at the end of our last episode. We're going to talk about capitalization rates.
These are slightly more exciting than Ricardo's Law of Rents.
Which was our best episode to date.
This one will exceed that, though. We're confident.
Actually, in all fairness, if you have not watched our market cycle episode, I think you should, and I will put it right there. Point up for me.
That's right.
Yeah, I think it's going to be above his finger, not mine.
So today we're going to get into some methodologies on valuation, which we talked about. We've covered these in the past, but just to sort of quickly go back over a few of them. There's a few different ways, of course. You got one of those is replacement costs, which is something were to get leveled, knocked down by a storm, whatever, what's it going to cost to rebuild it?
Right, and that's probably most useful when you're talking about brand new construction,
Yeah.
or you're talking about, if I'm going to build something, what's it going to cost?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it's not very useful as
It's
a
really more
valuation.
relevant when it comes to insuring a property than
right.
it is anything else. The other approach, this one is much more popular, especially on single-family residential, is comparable sales.
Right. So comparable sales are exactly what it sounds like. This is when the appraiser looks at other properties in the neighborhood and seeing what they sold for, and then compares the attributes. So maybe there's a 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, and you have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They might make a little adjustment to yours. But if the square footage is roughly the same and the neighborhood's roughly the same, they can make those little adjustments and come up with a projected value based on what other houses in that neighborhood would sell for.
Exactly. And then much more common and practical, especially for income-producing properties, is the income approach.
It's very, very, very common.
Right.
And there's a couple of different ways to do it. I mean, there's actually probably several different ways to do it, but the two most common are the gross rent multiplier and the direct capitalization rate. We're going to spend most of the rest of the episode talking about cap rates, but just quick on the gross rent multiplier. This is very useful for comparing multiple properties quickly. Basically, what they're looking at is the price divided by rent. Yeah. So if the rent multiplier is 10, that means the rent's $10, the property is worth 10 times that, or $100. And if the rent multiplier is 15, it'd be worth $150.
Right. They're useful in doing a quick down and dirty, but they're really inaccurate because they don't take into account the operating expenses of a particular property, which obviously a capitalization rate does.
Right, which is actually the reason that cap rates are the most commonly used methodology for evaluating commercial and larger residential properties. So basically what a cap rate is the cap rate is defined as, honestly, the net operating income divided by the purchase price. So that's
it's the return on investment you would make if you purchased for all cash after you backed out your operating expenses.
Right. And if you look at the formula, that's exactly what it is, right? So cap rate is literally capitalization, the money, right, and then the rate that you get on your money. So if you paid $1 million for a property and it was a 10 cap property, it would produce 10% of $1 million or $100,000. Yeah. If it was a 5 cap property, it would produce $50,000. If it was a 20 cap property, it would produce $20,000. And so the great part about cap rates is, though, that if you know any one of the three variables, right? So if you either know what the market cap rate is, and we're going to talk about that in a minute and how you might discover that, or if you know what the net operating income is, you can figure out the value. But if you know the value, like say the purchase price, and you know the cap rate, you can figure out what the net operating income is. So if you have two of the three variables, you can figure it out, and that can be very useful. In particular, if you're trying to sort out what market cap rate should be, right? Because if you know information about things in the market, then you can start to create sort of a list of what things are going for. So I think it's important, though, before we get too far into cap rates, to just do a quick definition of net operating income, because not everyone understands exactly what that is. So net operating income, or NOI, is all of the operating income attributable to the property.
The gross income.
Yeah, gross income minus all of the gross expenses.
Yes.
So, but the gross expenses do not include things like income taxes, like the taxes that the individual owners would pay. It doesn't include things like financing costs, because those vary from person to person. They're not based on the property. It's all of the income that you receive minus all of the expenses you would pay if you paid cash for the company, for the property. So that's NOI, and that's actually why it equalizes across all properties. If Brian has better financing terms than me, he might make more money on a property than me because of his financing, but the property is not going to change in value based on that.
The performance.
Yeah, and that's why cap rates are very, very useful. So if we want to calculate value with cap rates, how would we do that? Like what would you do to calculate a value?
You just take the purchase price divided by the net operating income.
Well, this is how you'd find the cap rate. But let's say you knew that the market cap rates for a particular type of property was a 10 cap.
No, income divided by cap.
Right. So what you can do when you're looking at property then is you can say, okay, I'm going to underwrite the property and figure out how much income it produces, right? So you calculate it out and you find out it makes $10,000 a year in income, and you think that the market cap is 10 cap. So all you'd have to do to figure out what you'd be willing to pay for that property is divide the market cap into the income. So that's sort of the most useful thing about cap rates, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of sort of secondary uses to cap rates that I think make them very, very powerful. The most common is predicting value and sort of coming up with prices. But if you think about it, because everyone in the market, or essentially everyone, is using cap rates to determine the value of a property, if you can increase that net operating income even a little bit, you get an exponential increase in value.
Yeah. I mean, the way it works is that the lower the cap rate, the higher the purchase price. You're getting a reduced rate of return, for that asset.
It's counterintuitive, right? Like lower return means a higher value.
Yeah, exactly. And so where we have to be careful, and I think this is instructive, is that right now, what we've seen is a compression of cap rates in just about every market in the United States and probably in many around the world too, especially, going back to multifamily as an asset class. A few years ago, here locally, you could get those at a 10 or 11 cap rate, which is great, but that's compressed now. So those same properties are maybe selling somewhere between 7 and 8.
Right. So. Which is a significant difference, because if you think about this this is a whiteboard moment, but I'm going to skip the whiteboard. If you think about this from a specific property, like our hypothetical property that makes $10,000 a year, if the cap rate is a 10 cap, which you said you could have bought it at, it's worth you would have bought it for $100,000. But if the cap rate is compressed to a 5 cap, let's make the math easier, it would be worth $200,000, right? Half the return, but double the value. And if it had compressed to like an 8 cap, it would be whatever 10,000 divided by 8% is, which is it's not 80. Someone with math skills can put it in the notes, or else we can just use a calculator next time and figure it out. But the point is that if you can increase the net operating income, which can be done in two ways, right? You can either lower expenses or you can increase rents. Income. Yeah. And one thing which has made multifamily investing really great, locally in the last few years, is that cap rates have been going down at the same time rents have been going up, which means you're getting higher income and higher values for that income. And you can literally calculate the value of $1 extra of income, right? If you have a 10 cap and you increase the NOI by $1, you get $10 worth of extra equity, which you can then tap into through a refinance or sale at some point in the future. Or just makes your net worth look really good.
So the other way you can accomplish that too is by forcing appreciation. Right?
Well, and that's really where it becomes really valuable, right? You're going to force appreciation by making whatever improvements necessary to the operating expenses and or rent, which could be, by painting, putting in granite countertops or something like that,
rehabs,
which are going to do things that are going to allow you to charge a higher rent, and by getting a higher rent, you get a higher net operating income.
Exactly.
And that's really where I think the most money is made in all commercial properties is that increase in value from cap rates.
100% agree. And the other part too is that different, even within the same asset classes. So going back to apartment buildings, you have A-class properties, B-class properties, and C-class properties. And so typically an A-class will trade at a lower cap rate, meaning a higher value than a C-class. Right.
And how do you know what the appropriate cap rate is?
Well, you can look at sales history in a market, and it's a little bit harder to find, the income piece of it that you need to determine the NOI.
Right. So I think, it's kind of an unfair question because I had the answer prepared, but I think that there's a couple things that you need to do. One thing you can do is just ask, if I want to know what the cap rate for apartment complexes in Chattanooga are, and I know it's a B-class apartment, I'm going to call up Brian Leverage and say, Brian, what should what should the cap rate be? And he'll probably know because he's in this market and he's built that knowledge from being here. But if you're not in a market and you're thinking about getting in a particular market, what you need to do is you need to start analyzing a lot of deals and you need to record that data. Even if you don't buy it, if you've analyzed it and you've calculated what you think the net operating income is, and then later someone else buys it, you now know what the cap rate is, which is why that formula is so powerful. And you can kind of create a scorecard for yourself and have this sort of running tally of what things are selling for. And then another thing to think about is too, cap rates aren't static, like you were saying. They go up and down, right? But they're market-based. And so under the efficient market theory, there's really no way to assume that cap rates are going to go up or down. You just have to kind of take cap rates the way they are, because if you knew they were going to go up, for example, then everyone would know they're going to go up, and they would already have gone up.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of assume the market knows what it's doing, but you do have to also recognize that there's a theoretical limit to how low cap rates can go. If interest rates go up, people need to make a bigger return or they can't afford to buy the property, and that's going to force cap rates up. If the market gets really hot like it's been the last few years, it's going to force cap rates down.
And finishing up on the earlier example, a Class A property, for instance, the reason it trades at a lower cap rate and a higher value is because it's a lower risk investment to own than, say, a C-class property. But what we've seen now is there used to be maybe hypothetically about a 5 percentage point difference in the cap rates between an A and maybe a C, and now that's shrunk by maybe 50%. So what you're seeing is not so much that these A's have increased in value so much, but there's so much more demand for the C's coming in that people are piling
it's also a risk measure, right? So cap rates are a risk measure, and we've seen a lot of new construction, and new construction means that the values, there's more supply. The values are going to be constrained as a result of that. So that's causing it to further squish together. Yeah. So that's something that that I think about a lot when I'm trying to decide what I want to invest in, is where the risk is.
And the biggest thing about cap rates is it's a garbage in, garbage out mentality, right? So your inputs are extremely important when you're trying to figure out what the net operating income is.
Yeah, if you think it's an A-class property and it's really a C-class property, that's a real big problem.
That's you probably shouldn't be buying apartments then. Number one. But number two, when you're doing your analysis, it's important to get all of the expenses right. Never rely on the selling agent's pro forma, because they might understate some of the expenses like maintenance or vacancy, etc. And a miscalculation in that can actually cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars or more.
And this is why it's important to have experience in the market and to underwrite lots of deals, because after you've done a bunch of deals or you've seen a lot of deals, you're going to spot, that's weird. They say that the taxes are X dollars, but my experience is they should be Y dollars. Or there's no way I can manage that for 6%. Everyone else is charging 8% in the market. You're going to know those things just based on the fact that you've looked at a lot of deals. And that's where that scorecard can be really useful. Besides predicting the cap rate, it can also predict like what the accurate measure of the NOI should be.
Yeah, exactly.
So the last thing that you do with cap rates, and we've kind of touched this and then we can wrap up, is that you use it to compare one property to another. This is a little bit different than market capitalization rate. This is a project capitalization rate. Same formula, but instead of using market value, you use actual purchase price. So if the market cap rate's 7%, and I can buy a property that should be trading at 7%, but for whatever reason, maybe the owner's desperate or they just don't know what the market should be or whatever. If I can buy it at an 8 cap, my project capitalization rate is 8%. That's what I'm going to return on that. Also, project capitalization rate can be future looking as opposed to retro looking. So you could say, I'm going to buy it at the market 7 cap, but because I'm going to increase the income, my actual return is going to be 9%. So effectively, my cap rate is 9%. But when you go to sell, no one cares what your effective cap rate is. They look at the market cap. So you can get that added value. That's another way of forcing appreciation.
All right. Oh, good stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that went really well. Probably our best episode yet.
Yes, I would say so.
Besides all the other ones.
Yes.
Except for maybe that Ricardo's one, because that one was a little touchy. Although I like that episode, and I think you should all go to it and vote in the poll about which episode is better. We're going to put it up right here. Poll, which episode is better. Right there. Or maybe over there. I'm not really sure where it goes on the YouTube screen.
You'll see it eventually.
It'll be somewhere. Anyway, thank you. And if you haven't done so already, we'd appreciate if you'd subscribe, give us the thumbs up, and ring the little bell so that you get notified of our shows.
Thanks for joining us again. Look forward to seeing you again in the future. Have a great day. Cheers.